The stranger rode into Nome, Alaska Territory, on a gray autumn morning in 1898, and Victoria Marlowe knew her father would find some way to blame her for that too. She stood outside the general store with a crate of dried beans balanced against her hip, watching the massive figure approach on a horse that looked too small beneath him. The man was built like the mountains themselves, all broad shoulders and thick arms, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and a beard that had seen too many winters. His buckskin coat stretched across muscles that spoke of a life spent wrestling nature into submission, and even from a distance, Victoria could see the wariness in his eyes, the way they swept across the muddy street and wooden buildings as if cataloging every potential threat. "Get inside." Her father's voice cracked like a whip behind her. No one wants to see a cursed woman standing about like she has nothing better to do. Victoria's fingers tightened on the crate, but she said nothing. What was there to say after 5 years of the same words, the same accusations, the same shame? She turned and carried the beans into the store, her father's bitter muttering following her like a shadow. Samuel Marlowe had been a different man once, before her mother died, before the doctors in Seattle had confirmed what 3 failed marriages had already suggested. His daughter was barren, unable to bear children, cursed, as he'd taken to calling her in his darker moments, which had become nearly all moments. "You have made me a laughingstock," he said now, following her into the dim interior of the store they'd run together for the past 3 years. "Thomas Henderson's mother asked me yesterday when you would stop taking up space in my house. Stop eating my food. She said her son deserves better than damaged goods." Victoria set the crate down with more force than necessary. "Then perhaps you should tell Thomas Henderson that I have no intention of marrying him, as I've told him myself 6 times. You will marry who I tell you to marry, girl. You think anyone else will have you. A woman who cannot give a man sons. You are 23 years old and worthless." The words should have stopped hurting by now, but they never did. Victoria straightened her spine and met her father's bloodshot eyes. "I would rather be alone than married to a man who sees me as nothing more than a breeding mare that failed to perform." Her father's hand came up and Victoria flinched, but he only pointed at the door. "Get out. Make yourself useful. Go to the claims office and collect the notices for the board, and try not to let the whole town see your shame written across your face." She grabbed her shawl without a word and stepped back into the cold morning air. Nome was bustling despite the early hour, or perhaps because of it. Winter was coming fast this far north, and everyone was making final preparations. The town had exploded in size over the past year, with the gold rush bringing thousands of desperate, hopeful souls to these frozen shores. Most would leave disappointed, their dreams crushed by the brutal reality of Alaska's unforgiving landscape. Victoria understood that feeling well. She walked quickly past the saloon, the assay office, the rows of tents and hastily constructed buildings that had sprung up like mushrooms after rain. Men shouted to one another, hammers rang against nails, and somewhere a dog barked frantically. She kept her eyes down, avoiding attention as she'd learned to do. The stranger was tying his horse outside the Gold Dust Saloon when she passed. Up close, he was even more imposing than she'd initially thought. He stood well over 6 feet, with hands that could probably span her waist. His face was weathered and hard, carved by wind and sun into something almost brutal, but when his eyes met hers for just a moment, she saw something unexpected there. Kindness, maybe, or at least the absence of judgment. She looked away quickly and hurried on. The claims office was busy as always. Men crowded around the counter, arguing about boundaries and rights, waving maps and documents. Victoria waited patiently until the clerk, A tired-looking man named George noticed her. "Ah, Miss Marlowe, let me get those notices for you." He ducked into the back room and returned with a stack of papers. "How is your father today?" "The same," Victoria said, which was answer enough. George's expression softened with pity, and she hated that almost as much as she hated her father's cruelty. She was folding the notices into her satchel when a commotion erupted behind her. Two men had started shoving each other, their voices rising to shouts about claim jumping and theft. Victoria pressed herself against the counter, trying to stay out of the way as others joined the argument. Someone's elbow caught her shoulder, sending her stumbling sideways. A hand closed around her arm, steadying her with gentle firmness. She looked up into a face she recognized from earlier, the stranger with the mountains in his shoulders and winter in his eyes. "Careful," he said, his voice like river stones tumbling together, deep and rough. He released her arm as soon as she'd regained her balance, stepping back to give her space. "Thank you," Victoria managed, acutely aware of the stares they were drawing. A woman alone was always subject to speculation, and a cursed woman speaking to a stranger would fuel gossip for weeks. He nodded once, a slight dip of his chin, and turned his attention to the fighting men. "Enough." The single word, spoken quietly, cut through the chaos like a knife. Everyone turned to look at him. He did not raise his voice, did not threaten, simply stood there with his arms loose at his sides and waited. The two men who had been fighting backed away from each other, suddenly sheepish. "Take your business outside," the stranger said. "There is a lady present." The men shuffled out, muttering apologies, and the crowd dispersed. Victoria found herself alone with the stranger and George, who was staring at the newcomer with open curiosity. "Much obliged," George said. "Those two have been at each other's throats for weeks. I am George Patterson." "And you are Ryder Quinn." The stranger's eyes flicked to Victoria again, then away. "I am looking for work. Heard there might be need for hunters up here with winter coming." "There is always need for fresh meat," George confirmed. "You any good?" "Good enough to have survived 29 winters in the Rockies." George whistled low. "Mountain man, then. We could use someone like you. Most of these gold-hungry fools would not know which end of a rifle to point at a caribou. You should talk to Marshal Dawson. He keeps a list of folks looking for hunters and guides." Ryder Quinn nodded his thanks and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Madam," he said to Victoria, touching the brim of his worn hat. Then he was gone, his broad frame disappearing into the busy street. "Now there is a man who knows what he is about," George said admiringly. "Not like these soft-handed prospectors. That is the kind of man who could survive anything Alaska throws at him." Victoria murmured something noncommittal and left before George could say anything more. But as she walked back to the store, she found herself thinking about Ryder Quinn's eyes, and the way he had said "lady" as if he truly meant it. Her father was in a worse mood when she returned. He snatched the notices from her hand and immediately began complaining about the claims office's incompetence, the town's deterioration, and Victoria's continued existence in his household. She endured the tirade in silence, as she always did, and went about her work stocking shelves and helping customers. Thomas Henderson came in around noon, his mother trailing behind him like a battleship escorting a rowboat. Thomas was not a bad man, exactly. He was weak, easily led and utterly dominated by his mother, but he had never been deliberately cruel to Victoria. That did not mean she had any intention of marrying him. "Samuel," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying across the store, "we need to discuss arrangements." Victoria's father came out from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. "Eleanor, Thomas, what can I do for you?" "It is high time we settled this matter of your daughter," Mrs. Henderson announced, as if Victoria were not standing right there. "Thomas is willing to overlook her deficiencies, given the substantial dowry you are offering. We think a December wedding would be appropriate." Victoria's stomach dropped. "Father, you cannot be serious." "Quiet," he snapped. "This is not your decision to make." "I believe it is, actually." "I am not property to be sold." Mrs. Henderson's face pinched with displeasure. "Such disrespect. See, Samuel, this is what comes of giving women too much freedom. She needs a firm hand, which my Thomas will provide." Thomas, for his part, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He never did. When his mother was speaking, Victoria looked at her father, searching for some hint of the man he had been before grief and bitterness had consumed him. "Please," she said quietly, "do not do this." "You will marry Thomas in December," her father said flatly. "It is already decided. He is the only man willing to take you, and you should be grateful for that mercy. It is not mercy to force someone into a loveless marriage. Love." Her father spat the word like a curse. "You think you deserve love. You are cursed, Victoria, broken, useless. You should thank God that anyone is willing to tolerate your presence, let alone marry you." The words hit like physical blows, but Victoria refused to cry. Not here, not in front of these people who already pitied or despised her. "I will not marry him," she said clearly. "I do not care what you have promised. I will not do it." "Then get out of my store." Her father's face had gone purple with rage. "Get out and do not come back until you are ready to be obedient." Victoria untied her apron with shaking hands and laid it on the counter. Without another word, she walked out into the afternoon sunlight, her heart pounding and her mind racing. She had nowhere to go. Her mother's family was all in Seattle, and she had no money for passage south. The few friends she had made in Nome were not close enough to impose upon for housing, and boarding houses would not take a single woman without references or payment in advance. She found herself walking toward the edge of town, away from the crowds and noise, toward the wild country that stretched out in all directions. The landscape was beautiful in its harshness, all rolling tundra and distant mountains under a sky that seemed impossibly vast. This far north, autumn came early and left quickly. Already the ground was hard at night, and frost touched everything by morning. Victoria sat on a large rock and finally allowed herself to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the mother she had lost, for the father she would never get back, for the children she would never bear, for the future that seemed to hold nothing but loneliness and despair. She did not hear the footsteps approaching until a deep voice said, "Are you hurt?" Victoria's head snapped up. Ryder Quinn stood a respectful distance away, his expression concerned. His horse grazed nearby, apparently unworried by her tears. "I am fine," she said automatically, wiping at her face with her sleeves. "Forgive me for disagreeing, but you do not look fine." Something about his blunt honesty made her laugh, though it came out more like a hiccup. "No, I suppose I do not." He stood there, waiting, and Victoria found herself talking before she could stop herself. Maybe it was because he was a stranger, or because she had nothing left to lose, or because his eyes held that same kindness she had noticed before. She told him everything. About her 3 failed marriages, about the doctor's diagnosis, about her father's treatment and the forced engagement to Thomas Henderson. The words spilled out in a rush, and Ryder listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finally fell silent, exhausted, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father is a fool." Victoria blinked, startled. "I am sorry, a fool," Ryder repeated. "And cruel besides. You are not cursed, Miss Marlowe. You are just a woman who cannot have children. That does not make you worthless, and it sure as hell does not give anyone the right to treat you like dirt." The fierce conviction in his voice took her breath away. "You cannot possibly understand what that means for a woman. I have no value without the ability to provide heirs. That is what your father has told you. That is what those small-minded people in town believe. But I have spent most of my life in the mountains, Miss Marlowe, away from society and its rules about what makes a person valuable. And from where I stand, you seem like someone with a spine of steel and a good heart. That is worth more than a womb that works." Victoria stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not her husbands, not her friends, certainly not her father. "Why would you say that?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." Ryder shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "I know you carry heavy crates without complaint. I know you showed manners to a clerk when you could have ignored him. I know you stood up to your father even knowing it would cost you. And I know you came out here to cry alone rather than make a scene in town. That speaks to character, Miss Marlowe." "Victoria," she said impulsively. "If you are going to say such things, you should call me Victoria." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then you should call me Ryder." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, and Victoria felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, had defended her worth without hesitation, had seen her as a person rather than a failure. "I need to find somewhere to stay," she said finally. "I cannot go back to my father's house, and I have no money for lodging." Ryder was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "I have been staying in a cabin about 2 miles north of town. The owner died last winter, and his family back in the States has not claimed it yet. It is not much, but it is sound. You could stay there if you need to." "I could not possibly impose." "You would not be. I sleep outside most nights anyway, prefer it." Victoria hesitated. It would be scandalous for her to stay in a cabin belonging to a man she had just met. But then again, her reputation was already in tatters. What did she have to lose? "Just until I figure out what to do next," she said. "Thank you." Ryder nodded and moved to his horse, mounting with an easy grace that belied his size. He held out his hand to help her up behind him, and Victoria took it, feeling the strength in his calloused palm as he pulled her up as if she weighed nothing. "Hold on," he said, and she wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. He clicked his tongue, and the horse began to walk. They rode in silence through the tundra, the town falling away behind them. The land here was open and wild, dotted with stunted shrubs and patches of moss, rising and falling in gentle swells. In the distance, mountains rose like teeth against the sky, their peaks already white with snow. The cabin appeared after about 20 minutes of riding, nestled into a small hollow that provided some protection from the wind. It was small but well built, with a stone chimney and glass windows that were rare this far north. A small creek ran nearby, its water clear and cold. Ryder dismounted and helped Victoria down, his hands gentle despite their size. "Previous owner was a trapper," he explained, leading his horse to a rough stable beside the cabin. "Built it to last. There is firewood stacked inside and basic supplies. You should be comfortable enough." He unsaddled his horse and led Victoria into the cabin. The interior was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame with a corn husk mattress. Shelves lined one wall, holding tins and jars. A lantern hung from a beam. "I will sleep in the stable," Ryder said. "Built a decent bunk there, you will have privacy." "Ryder, I cannot take your shelter. It is not mine, and you need it more than I do." He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. Soon flames were crackling, spreading warmth through the small space. I will bring you some fresh meat tomorrow. There is coffee in the tin on the shelf and dried goods in the crate under the table. Victoria watched him work, this mountain of a man who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than her own father had in 5 years. "Why are you helping me?" Ryder paused, staring into the fire. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "She died giving birth to a baby that never took a breath. Her husband blamed her for it, said she must have done something wrong. Treated her so badly toward the end that she stopped wanting to live. When the bleeding would not stop, I do not think she fought very hard." "I am so sorry," Victoria whispered. She was 19, had her whole life ahead of her. He straightened, his broad shoulders tense. "I swore then that if I ever saw a woman being broken down for something beyond her control, I would do what I could to help. So that is what I am doing." The firelight played across his face, highlighting the hard planes and the old pain in his eyes. Victoria wanted to say something profound, something that would ease that ancient hurt, but no words came. "Thank you," she said instead, "for everything." Ryder nodded and moved toward the door. "Bar this behind me. Anyone comes around, you have cause to worry. Most folks around here are decent enough, but the gold brings out the desperate in people." "Where will you be?" "In the stable. You need anything, just call out." He left, pulling the door closed behind him, and Victoria slid the wooden bar into place. Then she stood in the center of the cabin, looking around at this unexpected sanctuary, and wondered what on earth she was going to do next. The first night was difficult. Victoria was not used to silence. In her father's house, there had always been noise, his complaints, the creak of floorboards, the sound of wind rattling windows. Here, there was only the crackle of the fire and the distant whisper of the creek. She lay awake for hours, her mind spinning with worries and possibilities. By morning, she had made a decision. She would not go back. Whatever it took, she would build a new life for herself, even if that meant leaving Nome entirely. But first, she needed money, and that meant work. Ryder was already up when she emerged from the cabin, dressed in yesterday's rumpled clothes. He had a fire going outside and was roasting what looked like rabbit on a makeshift spit. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Coffee is ready if you want some." Victoria accepted the tin cup he offered, savoring the bitter warmth. "I need to find work," she announced. "Something that pays in actual money, not just room and board." "What can you do?" "I can keep books, manage inventory, write a fair hand. I helped run my father's store for 3 years. I can cook and clean, though I suppose that will not pay much. I can shoot if necessary, though I am better with a rifle than a pistol." Ryder looked up at that, one eyebrow raised. "You can shoot. My mother taught me before she died. She said a woman in the West needed to know how to protect herself. Smart woman." He pulled the rabbits off the fire and set them on a flat rock to cool. "There is a woman in town, Martha Jensen. She runs a bakery and has been looking for help. Her arthritis is getting bad, and she needs someone who can do the heavy work. Pays decent. You think she would hire me, given my reputation? Martha does not care much for gossip. She will judge you on your work, nothing else." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, and then Ryder saddled his horse. "I will take you into town. Need to speak with the marshal anyway about hunting work." Victoria climbed up behind him again, her arms around his waist, and tried not to notice how safe she felt pressed against his broad back. It had been so long since she had felt safe anywhere. Nome was busy with morning activity. Ryder left her outside the bakery with directions to the marshal's office and a promise to return in an hour. Victoria squared her shoulders and went inside. The bakery was small but spotlessly clean, filled with the heavenly scent of fresh bread. A woman in her 50s stood behind the counter, kneading dough with gnarled hands that clearly caused her pain. "Help you?" she asked, not unkindly. "My name is Victoria Marlowe. I heard you might be looking for help." Martha's hand stilled. "Samuel's daughter heard about yesterday. Your father is telling everyone you ran off with some drifter." "I did not run off with anyone. I left because he was trying to force me into marriage with Thomas Henderson. Cannot say I blame you for that. Thomas is a decent enough boy, but that mother of his would make any marriage a misery." Martha studied Victoria with sharp eyes. "You know anything about baking? Some. I am a quick learner. Can you lift 50 pounds? "Yes, madam." "And you do not mind hard work?" "No, madam." Martha nodded slowly. "I will give you a trial, 3 days. If you work out, the job is yours for $5 a week plus room in the back. There is a small space behind the kitchen that is not much, but it is private and warm." $5 a week was not generous, but it was fair, and the room meant Victoria would not have to impose on Ryder's hospitality any longer than necessary. "Thank you. I will not disappoint you. See that you do not. I open at 4 in the morning and we work until 6 in the evening. You get Sunday afternoons off. Now take off that fancy dress and put on the apron hanging by the door. We have bread to bake." Victoria spent the next 3 days learning the rhythms of the bakery. The work was physically demanding, hauling sacks of flour and buckets of water, kneading vast quantities of dough, managing the temperamental ovens. But it was also satisfying in a way that working in her father's store had never been. Martha was a stern taskmaster but fair, and she never once mentioned Victoria's supposed curse or her broken marriages. Ryder came by each evening to check on her progress. He never stayed long, just appeared at the back door with some offering, a brace of ptarmigan, a jar of wild berries, firewood for Martha's stove. They would talk for a few minutes, careful conversations about nothing important, and then he would leave, touching his hat in that way he had. On the 3rd day, Martha told Victoria the job was hers permanently. "You are a hard worker and you do not complain," Martha said approvingly. "That is rare enough these days. The room is yours if you want it." Victoria moved her few possessions into the tiny space behind the kitchen that evening. It was barely larger than a closet, with just enough room for a narrow bed and a small trunk, but it was hers. She had earned it. Ryder found her sweeping the bakery floor after closing. "Heard you got the job," he said from the doorway. "Congratulations. Thank you. And thank you for telling me about it and for letting me stay in the cabin and for everything else." "No need for thanks. You earned the job yourself." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, and Victoria realized she did not want him to leave. Over the past few days, she had found herself looking forward to his visits, to the sound of his deep voice, and the way his presence made her feel steady and safe. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked impulsively. Martha left some fresh cinnamon rolls, and it seems wrong to let them go to waste. Something warm flickered in Ryder's eyes. "I would like that very much." They sat at one of the bakery's small tables, and for the first time since they had met, they talked, really talked. Ryder told her about his life in the mountains, about trapping and hunting, about long winters spent in a cabin so remote that he would not see another human being for months at a time. He spoke of grizzly bears and wolf packs, of frozen rivers and avalanches, of the terrible beauty of wilderness untouched by civilization. Victoria told him about her mother, who had been gentle and kind and had died far too young. About her first marriage at 18 to a farmer's son who had wanted a house full of children to help work the land, and how the marriage had dissolved when no children came. About her second marriage at 20 to a merchant in Seattle, and how he had grown cold and distant when she still did not conceive. About her third marriage at 22 to a widower with 2 grown children, and how he had finally paid for the doctor who had confirmed what everyone already suspected. "He was almost kind about it," Victoria said quietly. "Told me it was not my fault that these things happened. But he still asked for an annulment. His children needed a stepmother who could give them siblings," he said. "It was practical." "Practical," Ryder repeated, his voice hard. "Cold word for a cruel thing. He was not wrong, though. His children did need a mother who could have babies." "What use am I to anyone?" Ryder's hand moved across the table and covered hers, his touch warm and rough and gentle. "Victoria, listen to me. You are not useless. You are not cursed. You are a woman with value that has nothing to do with children. You are smart and strong and brave. You walked away from everything you knew rather than be forced into a marriage you did not want. That takes courage most people do not have." Victoria looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers dwarfed hers. She had been touched by men before, by her husbands and her father, but never like this, never with such care. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You barely know me." "Maybe I want to know you better." Her eyes flew up to meet his, and what she saw there made her heart stutter. Interest. Real interest. Not the calculating assessment of a man evaluating breeding stock, but the warm regard of someone who genuinely liked what he saw. "Ryder, you should know that I cannot give you children. I cannot give you anything that most men want from a wife. I am not most men." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "I have spent 12 years alone in the mountains, Victoria. I chose that life because I did not want to be around people who cared more about appearances and expectations than about what was real and true. If I ever decided to share my life with someone, it would be because I valued them as a person, not because I needed them to perform some function. I do not understand. I am saying that if I were interested in a woman, her ability to bear children would not be on my list of concerns. I would care about whether she was kind and honest, whether she could hold her own in a difficult world, whether she made me want to be near her." Victoria's breath caught. "And are you interested in a woman?" Ryder smiled, a real smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. "I am beginning to think I might be." They sat there in the quiet bakery, hands joined across the table, and Victoria felt something bloom in her chest. Something she had thought was dead. Hope. Over the following weeks, Ryder became a fixture in Victoria's life. He would stop by the bakery most evenings, sometimes bringing game he had hunted, sometimes just coming to talk. They would sit together after Martha had gone home, drinking coffee and sharing the day's small triumphs and frustrations. Victoria learned that Ryder had been born in Missouri, the youngest of 4 children. His father had been a trapper who had taught him the wilderness skills that had kept him alive. His mother had died when he was 12, and his sister, the one who had died in childbirth, had been his favorite sibling. The others had moved east years ago, seeking civilization and comfort. Ryder had gone the opposite direction, deeper into wild country, looking for something he could not quite name. "I think I was looking for peace," he told her one evening as they walked along the creek that ran near town. "In the mountains, things are simple. You hunt to eat. You build shelter to survive. There are no petty cruelties, no judgment, just you and the land. Did you find it? Peace for a while. But it gets lonely after enough years. I realized I was not at peace, I was just hiding." Victoria understood that. "Is that why you came to Nome?" "Partly. Also because I am getting too old to spend winters alone in a cabin. 29 is not ancient, but it is old enough to know that there should be more to life than just surviving." They had stopped walking, standing on the bank of the creek where the water ran clear over smooth stones. The evening light turned everything golden, and Victoria was intensely aware of Ryder beside her, of his warmth and solidity. "What do you want from life?" she asked. I want what everyone wants, I suppose. Someone to share the days with. Work that matters. Maybe a piece of land to call my own." He looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "What about you? I want to stop feeling like I am broken. I want someone to see me as whole, just as I am." She took a breath. "And I want to know what it is like to be loved, truly loved, not as a means to an end, but just for myself." "You deserve all of that," Ryder said quietly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Victoria leaned into the touch without thinking. "Victoria, I need you to know something," he said, his voice rough. "I am interested in courting you properly, but only if that is something you want. I will not push. I will not demand. If you say no, I will respect that and still be your friend, courting." The word seemed almost absurd given her circumstances. Who courted a barren woman with 3 failed marriages behind her? But looking up at Ryder, at the genuine care in his expression, Victoria realized she did not care about absurdity or convention or what anyone else thought. "I would like that very much," she whispered. He smiled, and then his hand moved to cup her jaw, tilting her face up. "May I kiss you?" No man had ever asked permission before. They had simply taken, assuming it was their right as husbands or suitors. The question itself was a gift. "Yes," Victoria breathed. Ryder's kiss was gentle, almost tentative, his lips warm against hers. It was nothing like the perfunctory kisses of her marriages, given and received as obligation. This was something else entirely, something that made her heart race and her skin flush and her hands come up to clutch his shirt. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria was breathing hard and Ryder's eyes had gone dark with want. "I have thought about doing that for weeks," he admitted. "Only weeks? I have thought about it since the day you called me a lady and meant it." He laughed, a deep rumbling sound that she felt through her palms where they rested against his chest. Then he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Victoria stopped thinking at all. They courted through October and into November, as proper as 2 people could be given the circumstances. Ryder took her on long walks through the tundra, teaching her to read the land the way he did. He showed her how to track animals, how to identify edible plants, how to predict weather by the way the wind blew. Victoria introduced him to the few friends she had in town, women who worked as seamstresses or laundresses or cooks. To her surprise, they accepted Ryder without question. Martha, in particular, approved. "That one is solid," she told Victoria. "Not like these gold-hungry fools running around. He knows what matters." But not everyone was accepting. Victoria's father confronted her one morning when she was walking to the bakery. "You are a disgrace," Samuel hissed, stepping in front of her. "Running around with that mountain savage, making a spectacle of yourself." "I am making a life for myself," Victoria replied calmly. "Something you made clear I could not do in your house. You belong to me until you marry." "I am your father." "You stopped being my father the day you called me cursed." Samuel's face went purple. "You ungrateful girl, after everything I have done for you. What have you done for me exactly? Fed and housed me while reminding me daily that I am worthless." "Thank you, but I prefer to feed and house myself." "I could force you to come back. The law is on my side." Victoria met his eyes steadily. "You could try. But I am 23 years old and I have work and friends and money of my own now. I do not think the marshal would side with you, especially once I tell him about the forced engagement to Thomas Henderson." It was a bluff. Victoria had no idea whose side the marshal would take, but her father did not know that. "You will regret this," he said, but he stepped aside, letting her pass. Victoria's hands were shaking by the time she reached the bakery, but she felt oddly triumphant. She had stood up to him. She had drawn a line and defended it. Ryder found her in the back room during her lunch break, her face still flushed with the aftermath of confrontation. She told him what had happened, and his jaw tightened with anger. "If he tries anything, you tell me," Ryder said. "I mean it, Victoria. I will not let him hurt you." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her feel warm all over. "He is just bitter and angry. I do not think he will actually do anything." Maybe, but bitter and angry men can be dangerous. As it turned out, Ryder was right to be concerned. It happened on a cold evening in mid-November. Victoria was closing up the bakery, sweeping the floor while Martha counted the day's receipts in the back. She did not hear the door open, did not know anyone was there, until a hand clamped over her mouth and an arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She tried to scream but could not draw breath. Tried to fight, but her attacker was too strong. She was dragged toward the door, her heart hammering with terror. Then the door burst open and Ryder was there, his face transformed into something terrible and wrathful. He moved faster than Victoria would have thought possible for a man his size, crossing the space in 2 strides. His fist connected with her attacker's jaw with a sickening crack. And suddenly, Victoria was free, stumbling forward. Ryder caught her with one arm while his other hand grabbed the attacker by the collar and slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle the windows. Victoria's attacker was Thomas Henderson, and he looked absolutely terrified. "Please," Thomas babbled. "I was not going to hurt her, I swear. My mother said I should just take her, that she would come around once we were married. Please do not kill me. Give me one good reason why I should not," Ryder growled, and he sounded more animal than man. "Because he is pathetic," Victoria said, finding her voice. "And he is not worth the trouble." Martha had emerged from the back, rolling pin in hand. "What in blazes is going on?" "Thomas tried to kidnap me," Victoria said, still shaking. On his mother's orders, apparently. Martha's expression went cold. "You stupid boy, get out. And tell your mother that if either of you come near this bakery again, I will shoot you myself." Ryder released Thomas, who scrambled for the door and disappeared into the night. Then Ryder turned to Victoria, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "Are you hurt?" "No, you got here in time." She was trembling now, the fear catching up with her. "How did you know?" Saw Thomas hanging around earlier, looking nervous. "Something felt wrong, so I came back to check." His thumb stroked her cheeks. "I am sorry I was not here sooner. You were here when I needed you, that is what matters." Martha insisted that Ryder stay with them until Victoria's nerves settled. They sat in the bakery's back room, drinking the whiskey Martha kept for medicinal purposes, and Victoria felt her shaking slowly subside. "I am going to talk to the marshal tomorrow," Ryder said quietly. "Make sure Thomas and his mother understand there will be consequences if they try anything else." "I should come with you," Victoria said. "It is my complaint. Then we will go together." The marshal, a gruff man named Tom Dawson, listened to their story with a deepening scowl. "Eleanor Henderson has gotten too big for her britches," he said when they finished. "Thinking she can arrange kidnappings like this is some kind of drawing room drama. I will have a word with her and with Thomas. They will not bother you again, Miss Marlowe." "Thank you, Marshal." As they left the office, Ryder took Victoria's hand. "I do not like the idea of you being alone in that back room at the bakery. Anyone could break in." "Where else would I go? The cabin. It is sturdier, and I will be right there if anything happens." Victoria hesitated. She had been working so hard to establish her independence, to prove she could take care of herself. But the truth was, she did not want to be alone, especially not after last night. "I do not want to be a burden," she said. "You are not. You could never be." Ryder stopped walking and turned to face her. "Victoria, I care about you. More than I have cared about anyone in a very long time. I want to protect you. Please let me." She looked up at him, at this mountain of a man who had appeared in her life like something out of a dream, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "All right," she said. "I will move to the cabin." They told Martha that evening, and the older woman nodded approvingly. "Good. That boy Thomas is weak, but his mother is vindictive. You will be safer out of town." She squeezed Victoria's hand. "I will see you tomorrow at 4 as usual." Ryder helped Victoria move her few belongings to the cabin that night. The space looked exactly as it had when she had first seen it, except now it felt like coming home. Ryder had added small touches: wildflowers in a jar on the table, extra blankets for the bed, a new lock on the door. "I will be in the stable," he said, setting down her trunk. "Same as before." But Victoria caught his hand before he could leave. "Ryder, wait." He turned, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. "I do not want you to sleep in the stable," she said quietly. "I want you here with me." His expression went very still. "Victoria, you should be sure about that. Once we cross that line, there is no going back. I am sure. I have been sure for weeks." She stepped closer, looking up at him. "I love you, Ryder Quinn. I think I have loved you since the day you told me I was not cursed." For a moment he just stared at her. Then he cupped her face in his big hands and kissed her with a fierce tenderness that made her knees weak. "I love you too," he said against her lips. "I have loved you since the day you cried on that rock and still had the strength to stand back up. You are the strongest woman I have ever known." They did not leave the cabin for 3 days. Ryder sent word to Martha that Victoria was ill, and Martha, wise woman that she was, sent back a basket of food and a note that said only, "Take your time." In those 3 days, Victoria learned what it meant to be cherished. Ryder touched her like she was precious, like her body was a gift rather than a defective tool. He traced every scar and imperfection with gentle fingers, and when she tried to apologize for her inability to give him children, he silenced her with kisses and told her he wanted her, just her, exactly as she was. They talked for hours, wrapped in blankets by the fire, making plans for a future that was starting to feel real. Ryder had saved most of his money from years of trapping and hunting, and he wanted to buy land, build a real house. Victoria wanted to keep working at the bakery at least for a while and maybe eventually open a small restaurant. "We could do both," Ryder said. "Build a homestead with enough space for a business. You could cook, I could hunt and farm. We could make it work." "That sounds like a dream." "Then let us make it real." On the 4th day, they returned to town to face whatever consequences their absence had created. To Victoria's surprise, there were none. Martha welcomed her back with a knowing smile and no questions. The marshal tipped his hat to Ryder on the street. Even the other shopkeepers treated them with polite respect. It was Martha who explained it later when Victoria asked. "Folks can be judgmental, but they are not blind," she said. "They can see that Ryder looks at you like you hung the moon. And they know what your father put you through and what that Henderson woman tried to do. Most people figure you deserve some happiness, propriety be damned." "But we are not married," Victoria protested. "Not yet, maybe, but everyone knows you will be." That night, Ryder proposed. There was no ring, no grand gesture, just the two of them sitting by the fire in their cabin after a long day of work. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because you need a husband or because I need a wife, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They wed in December in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of Nome. Martha stood up for Victoria and the marshal stood up for Ryder. There were no flowers, no fancy dress, just two people promising to love and cherish each other for whatever time they had. Victoria's father did not attend. though she had sent him word. She tried not to let it hurt, but Ryder saw the pain in her eyes when she glanced at the church door. "His loss," he murmured, taking her hand. "You have family here. Martha, the marshal, me, we are your family now." After the ceremony, Martha hosted a small gathering at the bakery. The guests were few but genuine. Women Victoria had worked with, men Ryder had hunted for, people who had seen past scandal and judgment to the truth underneath. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Martha pulled Victoria aside. "You did good, girl. That man will take care of you." "I know. Thank you, Martha, for everything. No thanks needed. You earned your place here." Ryder and Victoria walked back to their cabin through the cold December night, their breath fogging in the air. Fresh snow crunched under their boots and stars wheeled overhead in the vast black sky. Inside, Ryder built up the fire while Victoria changed out of her simple wedding dress into a nightgown. When she emerged from behind the privacy screen, he was waiting, and the look in his eyes made her flush with warmth. "Come here, wife," he said softly. Victoria went to him, letting him pull her into his arms. "Say it again, wife, my wife." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Mine, yours," she agreed, "and you are mine." They made love slowly that night as married people rather than secret lovers, and somehow it felt different. Sanctified. Real in a way that Victoria's previous marriages had never been. Afterward, lying in Ryder's arms with his hand stroking her hair, Victoria felt a peace she had never known. This man loved her, truly loved her, not for what she could give him but for who she was. The broken parts, the painful history, the uncertain future, all of it. "What are you thinking?" Ryder asked, his voice rumbling through his chest. "That I am happy, truly, deeply happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way." "Get used to it," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I plan to make you happy for the next 50 years at least," Victoria smiled. "Only 50? Well, I did not want to be presumptuous." She laughed and tilted her face up for a kiss. Outside, the wind howled and snow began to fall, but inside they were warm and safe and together. The winter passed in a blur of work and contentment. Victoria continued at the bakery, and Ryder took hunting jobs that kept them supplied with money and meat. They saved every penny they could, planning for the homestead they dreamed of building. In January, a land agent came through Nome with claims for sale. Ryder and Victoria went to look at a piece of property 20 miles south, a sheltered valley with a creek, timber for building, and flat land for farming. It was remote but beautiful, and the moment Victoria saw it, she knew it was theirs. They bought it for $300, nearly all their savings, and began making plans. Ryder would build a cabin in spring, something larger than the trapper's shelter they currently occupied. Victoria would keep working at the bakery until the house was livable, then transition to homesteading full-time. Martha was sad to lose her but understanding. "You deserve a home of your own, girl, and you will be close enough to visit." In March, Victoria realized her monthly courses were late. She dismissed it at first, thinking it was stress or the harsh winter affecting her body. But when another month passed with no sign and she began feeling queasy in the mornings, a terrible hope began to build in her chest. It was impossible. The doctors had been clear. She was barren, unable to conceive, but her body was telling her something different. She did not tell Ryder, too afraid to hope, too terrified of disappointment. Instead, she worked and waited and tried not to think about the impossible possibility growing inside her. In April, she could deny it no longer. Her belly had begun to swell just slightly, and the nausea was undeniable. She was pregnant. Victoria sat on the edge of their bed, hands pressed against her stomach, and cried. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming, terrifying joy. It was a miracle, an impossibility. A blessing she had never dared to hope for. Ryder found her there when he came in from checking his traps. "Victoria, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said, looking up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. "Everything is right. I am pregnant, Ryder. We are going to have a baby." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you sure?" His voice was thick with emotion. "As sure as I can be without a doctor." "But I know my body and I know what this feels like." She pulled back to look at him. "I thought it was impossible. The doctors said it was impossible. Maybe they were wrong, or maybe this is a miracle." Ryder's hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" "Happy, Victoria. I am terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I can possibly express." He cupped her face, his gray eyes intense. "But you need to know that even if this pregnancy had not happened, I would still be happy. I married you because I love you, not because I wanted children. This is a blessing, but you were already enough." Victoria kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "I know. That is why this feels like such a gift, because it is wanted but not needed. It is extra joy on top of a life that was already full." They decided to wait a few more months before telling anyone, wanting to be certain before sharing the news. Ryder became even more protective than before, insisting Victoria not lift heavy things or work too hard. Martha noticed the change immediately. "That man is hovering over you like you are made of glass," she observed one morning. "Something you want to tell me?" Victoria hesitated, then decided Martha deserved to know. "I am pregnant. About 3 months along, we think." Martha's face split into a huge grin. "Well, I will be. That is wonderful news, girl, but I thought you could not." "So did I. The doctors said it was impossible, but here we are." "Doctors do not know everything," Martha said firmly. "Sometimes the good Lord has different plans than what we expect." She pulled Victoria into a rare hug. "I am happy for you, truly happy." As spring turned to summer, Victoria's pregnancy became obvious. She had expected judgment, expected people to whisper about how convenient it was that the barren woman suddenly could conceive once she married her mountain man. But instead, people seemed genuinely happy for her. Even her father heard the news, though they had not spoken in months. He appeared at the bakery one morning, looking older and more tired than Victoria remembered. "I heard you are expecting," he said without preamble. "I am." Samuel shifted his weight uncomfortably. "The doctors said you could not have children." Apparently they were wrong. Her father stared at her for a long moment. "I was wrong too, about a great many things. I let grief and bitterness turn me into someone your mother would have been ashamed of." Victoria said nothing, waiting. "I cannot take back what I said or how I treated you," Samuel continued. "But I want you to know that I am sorry. You deserved better from me. It was not enough. It could never be enough to erase 5 years of cruelty and pain. But it was something, and Victoria decided to accept it for what it was." "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate you saying that." Samuel nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "If you need anything, for the baby, you let me know." He left before Victoria could respond, and she stood there feeling a complicated tangle of emotions. Forgiveness would take time if it ever came at all. But maybe, eventually, they could build something resembling a relationship. By August, Ryder had finished the cabin on their new land. It was beautiful, with 2 rooms and a loft, a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the valley. They moved in on a warm summer evening, and Victoria stood in the middle of their new home, 7 months pregnant and happier than she had ever been. "What do you think?" Ryder asked, watching her face. "I think it is perfect. I think we are perfect." She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly, where the baby was kicking actively. "I think our family is going to be very happy here." Ryder knelt and pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I promise to love you and protect you and teach you everything I know. And I promise to love your mother every day for the rest of my life." Victoria ran her fingers through his long hair, overcome with emotion. "I love you, Ryder Quinn. I love you too, Victoria Quinn." The baby came in October, during the first snowstorm of the season. Martha had come to stay with them, knowing Victoria's time was near, and it was her experienced hands that helped bring the child into the world. It was a long labor, exhausting and painful, and there were moments when Victoria was certain she could not go on. But Ryder was there, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement and love. Finally, after hours of struggle, a baby's cry split the air. Sharp and strong and furious. "It is a boy," Martha announced, laying the squalling infant on Victoria's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Victoria looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fists and shock of dark hair, and started crying. Ryder knelt beside the bed, staring at the baby with wonder and tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Victoria whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What will you name him?" Martha asked. Victoria looked at Ryder and they shared a smile. They had discussed names for months, going back and forth, unable to decide. But looking at their son now, Victoria knew exactly what his name should be. "Samuel," she said. "We will call him Samuel." Ryder raised an eyebrow. "After your father." "After the grandfather he deserves to have, if my father can become that man. And if he cannot, then Samuel will make the name mean something better." "Samuel Quinn," Ryder said, testing it out. "I like it." Martha cleaned up the baby and helped Victoria get comfortable, then excused herself to give the new family privacy. Ryder climbed onto the bed, careful not to jostle Victoria, and they sat together looking at their son. "I cannot believe he is real," Victoria said softly. "For so long I thought this would never happen." "I cannot believe you are real," Ryder replied. "A year ago I was alone in the mountains. Now I have a wife and a son and a home. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I never want to wake up." Baby Samuel made a snuffling sound and turned his head, rooting for milk. Victoria guided him to her breast, and he latched on with impressive determination. "He has your appetite," she told Ryder with a laugh, "and your stubbornness, I suspect." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son eat, and Victoria felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was everything she had wanted and thought she could never have. Not just a child, but a family. Not just a husband, but a partner who loved her unconditionally. Not just a house, but a home filled with warmth and safety and joy. The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and infant care. Samuel was a demanding baby but healthy, growing strong under his parents' devoted attention. Ryder proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle despite his size and rough appearance. He would walk the floor for hours with Samuel when the baby was fussy, singing mountain songs in his deep voice until Samuel fell asleep against his broad shoulder. In February, Samuel Marlowe came to visit. Victoria answered the knock on their cabin door to find her father standing in the snow, holding a beautifully carved wooden cradle. "Made this myself," he said gruffly. "Thought the baby might need it." Victoria invited him in, too surprised to do anything else. Samuel Marlowe met Ryder with wary respect, and Ryder, reading the situation, excused himself to check the horses, giving father and daughter privacy. "He is sleeping?" Samuel asked, nodding toward the cradle where baby Samuel lay swaddled. "Just went down. He keeps us up most of the night, so we treasure the quiet moments." Her father moved closer, looking down at his grandson, His face softened in a way Victoria had not seen in years. "He looks healthy, strong." "He is, growing like a weed." Samuel cleared his throat. "I meant what I said last summer about being sorry. I've had a lot of time to think about the man I became after your mother died. The things I said to you, the way I treated you, it was unforgivable." "I have not forgiven you," Victoria said honestly. "Not completely, but I am willing to try. For Samuel's sake, if nothing else. He deserves to know his grandfather." Her father nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I would like that, if you will let me. You can visit once a week. We will see how it goes from there." It was a tentative beginning, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, Samuel Marlowe became a regular presence in their lives. He was awkward at first, clearly unsure how to be around the baby, but gradually he relaxed. Victoria watched her father transform, saw him become someone gentler and kinder, someone her mother would have recognized. "People can change," Ryder observed one evening after her father had left, "if they want to badly enough. He has a long way to go before I fully trust him again. But I am glad Samuel will have a grandfather." "So am I. Family is important." By the time Samuel was a year old, Victoria and Ryder's homestead was thriving. They had chickens and goats, a vegetable garden that had produced well despite the short growing season, and Ryder's hunting kept them supplied with meat and furs to sell. Victoria had started baking bread and pastries to sell in Nome, building a small but steady business. Life was hard, as it always was in Alaska, but it was good. Victoria woke each morning to her son's laughter and her husband's kiss, and she went to sleep each night grateful for the unexpected blessings that had transformed her life. On a warm evening in June, with baby Samuel playing on a blanket in the grass and Ryder working on expanding the chicken coop, Victoria stood in the doorway of their cabin and looked out over their land. The valley was green and lush, the creek sparkled in the evening light, and in the distance, the mountains stood eternal and unmoved. She thought about the woman she had been a year and a half ago, broken and despairing, convinced she had no value. She barely recognized that woman now. Ryder appeared beside her, wiping sawdust from his hands. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far we have come, about how different my life is now. Better or worse?" Victoria turned to look at him, at this mountain of a man who had chosen her anyway, who had seen worth in her when everyone else, including herself, had seen only deficiency. "Infinitely better," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "You gave me my life back, Ryder. You showed me I was not cursed. You made me believe in myself again." "You did that yourself," he said, pulling her close. "I just reminded you of what was already there." Samuel made a demanding noise from his blanket, and they both laughed. Ryder went to scoop up their son, swinging him high in the air and earning delighted giggles. Victoria watched her two favorite people playing in the evening light, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been painful, but it had led her here, to this place, to this man, to this life that was richer and fuller than anything she had dared to imagine. She was not cursed. She had never been cursed. She was blessed beyond measure, and she would spend the rest of her days being grateful for the mountain man who had said, "I choose you anyway," and meant it with his whole heart. The evening faded into night, and the little family went inside their cabin, closing the door against the chill. Inside was warmth and light and love, and outside, the mountains stood watch, silent guardians over the valley that had become home. Victoria Quinn's story was far from over, but the beginning had been written in courage and kindness and unexpected grace. Whatever came next, she would face it with Ryder by her side and love filling her heart. And that, she thought as she settled Samuel into his cradle and climbed into bed beside her husband, was more than enough. It was everything.